So part of it is it's fun. Part of it is I want to break down this whole, like, just because you've been doing it forever means that you know everything.
That is Kevin Poorman, a Senior Developer Evangelist with Salesforce. I'm Josh Birk, a Developer Evangelist for Salesforce, and here on the Salesforce Developer Podcast, you'll hear stories and insights from developers for developers. Today, we sit down and talk with Kevin about his CodeLive series, and we'll dig a little bit deeper on a couple of highlighted topics from that show. But before we got there, I asked Kevin after his master's in Divinity, since most of us know him as a software engineer, and so did he kind of go to college for software engineering with a side of religion, or was it kind of the other way around?
Okay, start off with a hard-hitting question. So I actually I went to school because I wanted to teach theology, and a lot of things influenced me not going into that.
Okay.
I've been doing computer programming since I was 14.
Wow.
Yeah. So as it turns out, it's harder to get into a PhD program for theology than any other degree program out there. And it's mostly because there's only 4 or 5 institutions in the world that still offer it.
Interesting.
So, I got done with my master's degree and I wasn't selected as a PhD student.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And so basically falling back on software engineering. So what's your earliest experiences with computers then?
Yeah. I remember my dad brought home and I helped him unpack Apple IIe. And that was my first introduction to computers. He'd had a Commodore 64 beforehand, but the Apple IIe. And then when I was 14, I shattered my left hip and I ended up in the hospital for a couple of months. And Kansas is one of those great states where they don't really care if you're in the hospital. You still have to go to school.
Gotcha.
So schooling for me was they let me into this room where I got to play on an Apple IIc. It was great because it was color.
Right.
And I started, very quickly ran out of things to do out of the box with it. So I started playing around with Apple Basic.
Got it. Nice.
Yeah.
And when did you start working with Salesforce?
API 11, which if I remember correctly was released back in like 2009, 2008, 2009, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
I was working at a software as a service company, and the company decided to integrate Salesforce as our CRM. So there was this crazy 10-week span where everyone just crunched on that and we got it up and working. There's a lot of interesting late nights and fun algorithm discussions.
And when did you join Salesforce?
Let's see. I joined Salesforce in 2015, I believe. Yeah. June 2015, somewhere in there.
And back then you were an ISV evangelist?
No, I started off as, I don't even remember what my exact title was, but I was working with Mobile Push, the Mobile Push SDK in Marketing Cloud. And so a lot of mobile development, a lot of working with Marketing Cloud customers to help figure out why the Marketing Cloud mobile SDK wasn't working just like they thought it should.
Got it.
All centered around Mobile Push.
Got it. Okay, so now in your current role as an evangelist, how do you describe to people what you do?
So it alternates. Depending on how technical the person is, I can talk about how, I help our users sort of dream the possible and work out the issues and make things work for them and their companies in terms of developing on the platform. For someone a little less technical, I build demos and examples code, and I then tell the world about them in an effort to teach our users, our end developers, I'm going to coin a phrase, end developers, how to do things efficiently and correctly on the platform.
Got it. Well, so that segues into our main topic today, which is your CodeLive series. So what exactly is CodeLive and why did you kick that off?
So CodeLive is a weekly 1 hour-ish live stream where I and sometimes a guest will get together and live stream the development of some feature or focus of Apex or LWC, something on the platform. We've got a couple of instances where we've decided to go off platform, but usually it's pretty much tightly focused on doing development on the Salesforce platform. And we get together, we say, hey, today we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And we sit down and we code how to do X, Y, and Z. Generally trying to keep to basically a use case that is plausible, if not exactly something you would do every day.
Interesting. So tell me a little bit more about that. Like, is this, so the person you're peer programming with, is it like a passion project that they thought they might want to do, and then you kind of, again, you get with them and start fleshing that out?
Sometimes, like yesterday, we were recording this on a Friday. So yesterday we had a CodeLive. I had with me Chris Peterson, the PM for Apex, and he had this idea for building a logging framework using platform events. And so we sat down and said, let's build a logging framework. How would we architect that? How would we make sure that it's extensible? And, we worked through how to build out that sort of logging framework. Other times we've got this feature of Apex we want to help people understand how to use. So sometimes it's queuables, like we're going to do an hour long coding session on queuables. Other times it's features of the platform. Like we did one a few weeks back where I worked with part of the custom notifications API team. And we showed off how to send and receive these custom notifications in like a mobile app and as well as on the desktop.
Gotcha. And, this is a very different format than a lot of stuff that evangelists have put together. It's live. It's peer programming. Why did you want to go with this direction?
A bunch of reasons. One, it's a lot of fun.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to sit down, and there's a certain pressure that comes with developing software for an enterprise level that we don't necessarily need to propagate and keep around in our community. And so part of this is to keep it light and to, I've been doing this for Apex development, Salesforce development for more than 10 years. And I do some volunteer work with a group called Rad Women.
Oh, yeah.
And we teach women to develop on the Salesforce platform over the span of 10 weeks. And one of the things that I consistently get in feedback from them was, it's really great to see somebody who they look up as having all this experience still looking up information and data.
Right.
So part of it is, it's fun. Part of it is I want to break down this whole, like, just because you've been doing it forever means that you know everything idea. And another part of it is, I just want us to make sure that we're experimenting and trying new things. And when we have a novel use case come up, that use case may be novel to us, but surely somebody else has tried to do that same thing before.
And talking about things like, fear of failure and stuff like that, I think CodeLive has a few specific rules that you give to your guests. What kind of rules are those? Yeah,
so the first rule is failure is always an option. And that is to say, we can sit down and code something for an hour and have a typo that eludes us and it fails miserably, and that's okay. It's okay to work on code and not have it work out of the gate. We've had numerous examples where, somebody joins us for a CodeLive and they're in the chat room and they're giving us feedback like you misspelled this word or that sort of thing.
Nice.
And that's true to day-to-day programming, right? It's true to life. You can sit down and work on something and have a clear design in your head, have a clear focus. And then when you're done typing the last thing, it just doesn't work like you think it should. And so I guess I'll move back up to your previous question. Another thing I want to try and do with CodeLive is teach people to debug.
Okay.
And so failure is not only always an option. It's always sometimes that I also look for opportunities for us to highlight how we failed and how we corrected it. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and this has come up in a couple of themes on the podcast before, that, it's not just like failure is almost a requirement in development.
Yep.
Like you're not going to get it right first time out of the gate. And it pretty much, unless you're already copying existing code. And even then, good chances you're probably going to have to modify it a few ways. So what are some like tips and tricks that you've learned to kind of get that debugging into your normal life cycle of development?
Debugging into the normal life cycle of mine. So not to get on a soapbox, but
it is a podcast. Bring your own soapbox.
All right. I really find that one of the things that helps me understand my code, helps me identify where I've got a logic problem or where I've got an issue where I didn't think things through all the way, is writing unit tests. So I'm a huge proponent of let's write some code and then let's write some unit tests. and make them as specific as possible so that, if something later is a typo, then you're going to catch that immediately.
Yeah.
And sort of a corollary to that is running your unit tests all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was a consultant, I actually got into a groove of writing the unit tests first. And what I found was that writing the unit test first actually helped me cement what the code was actually supposed to do. It was kind of like the contract that I was going to actually go to. So it was sort of like, I would get all these business requirements, and then the first thing I did was try to kind of convert some of that into code. And then I think a discipline of test-driven development is like all your unit tests are supposed to fail first because you don't have any code to work against them. And then it's a matter of checking those things off to green. Is there anything specifically, like from a tools point of view, or anything that you do to kind of help expedite the debugging?
I'm a liberal user of system.debug.
Okay.
I find that the replay debugger is also quite helpful. We haven't often had an issue where the replay debugger has come up on CodeLive, but we have used it once or twice. But the replay debugger is quite handy. The system.debug is sort of the bread and butter of debugging. I remember reading a quote once. Somebody asked Kerrigan how he debugged, and he said he printed everything to the screen. And so, maybe old school, but it's effective.
Right. Well, and a little bit more on that with how you're actually producing CodeLive. What are some of the tools that you're doing to help with the peer programming itself? Because you're doing that all remotely.
Yeah. We're doing it with a combination of a streaming platform and with some plugins for our IDE, our editor. We use Visual Studio Code. So if you want to be on CodeLive with me, you'll be in Visual Studio Code, and there's a plugin for Visual Studio Code called LiveShare. And LiveShare allows for remote pair programming. So I'll open up a LiveShare session, give you a link, you join it, and then whenever you type, the people see you typing, everybody viewing sees you typing, and then when I type, we can, sort of have dueling keyboards, as it were.
Gotcha.
And it's really quite a joy to use that. And then we combine that with our streaming platform, Trailhead Live, so that we get the headshots and the audio and that sort of thing. So we use a combination of tools.
Nice. Now, I want to highlight a few specific episodes. For instance, you've just recently had our fellow evangelist / advocate, Julian Duque. Am I saying his name right?
I believe so.
I think I got it in one there, to talk Null Coalescence in one of my favorite languages, JavaScript. What is Null Coalescence?
Null Coalescence is it's an operator. So you got to think in terms of left side of the operator, right side of the operator. And in your head, if you look at the Null Coalescence operator, what it does is it says, is the thing on the left null or nullish in JavaScript? Because JavaScript likes to invent words. So nullish in JavaScript. And if it is nullish, it will return the right side of that operator.
Got it. I just have to say, because one of my favorite parts of that episode is the slide that breaks down nullish and falsy, which are now two of my favorite words. Give me a little bit more detail for people that may be like in Apex and not in JavaScript. What exactly do we mean by nullish and falsy?
Oh, see, now you're playing Stump the Chump here. So I'm not a JavaScript expert, so please don't quote me on this, but
Gotcha.
The idea of something being falsy is that there are certain values that are understood to be false, and it's more than just false. But there are some values that are understood to be truthy, and it's more than just true. So if you have like if you have a zero can be an integer and be truthy, but it might also come back as from like an API as a false understanding. So that's your falsy versus truthy. And then nullish is not only null, but also things that are understood to be equal to null.
Right.
Yeah.
Like empty-ish almost.
Yeah.
Like quote with nothing in it. Like, is that a value or is that a null?
It's like in old school Apex, we had to check and see if a variable was null. And then if it was a string, we wanted to make sure there was something in it. We had to check that, it was, not zero length or that it had some contents. And now we have an Apex that is blank.
Right.
Or is not blank. Right.
Got it. Now, what are some use cases that Null Coalescence really helps out with?
So let me back up. We don't really have a null coalescence operator in Apex yet. We have the safe navigation operator, which is a related concept.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the null coalescence operator, it's great for when you're doing or dealing with languages that have that concept of nullish, or other languages call it optional values, where you know there's a variable, but it may or may not have a value.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, giving a default. So if I've got Josh's website as a string, great, use it. Otherwise, say no website provided.
Got it. And are there any other lessons that Apex can learn from this?
You know, I enjoy sort of like working on the extreme edges of Apex. So I tried to write a null coalescence operator in Apex.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, you can't actually overwrite or rename to build a class out of null. You can't have a, you know, class null.
Yeah.
Which would be fun, but dangerous.
That's kind of taking nullish to a whole new level, I feel like.
Right. You know, the fun fact, you can actually you can overwrite the test class. So you can have if you create a class called test, you can dig yourself into all sorts of holes.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. But not with null. So I actually wrote it, but it's actually as a method, and it's really simple and it's easy to pull up. But it's interesting to try and think about what you might use that for in Apex. And the biggest use case is for doing things like, you know, providing a default where a value has come back null.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so moving on to another popular topic, John Daniels, episode 42 of this podcast, by the way, talks a lot about unlocked packages. And we've done a couple of episodes on unlocked packages, but I feel like this is just one of the things I like repeating because it's just something I really want developers to know about. So level set for us, like, what is unlocked packages and what did you and John put together in that episode?
Yeah, so let me answer those in reverse order.
Okay, perfect.
John and I spent the time we had on CodeLive. We took a bit of Salesforce Apex code that I had previously written, and we packaged it. Mm-hmm. And we created an unlocked package that people can then install in any org they've got, but not their production org, I think is the way it works. To be honest with you, I'm unlocked packages versus beta packages. I get a little confused on myself.
I think one is a variant of the other in that you can create an unlocked package, which is flagged as a beta. And because you're flagging it as a beta, then people can play around with it, but they can't use it in production itself.
Yeah.
And that if it's not flagged as beta, then it works kind of like, I don't want to say quite like NPM, but a little bit like NPM, where you can basically install it into the org of your choice, bring in dependencies and stuff like that.
Yeah. So it's not that you can't install it in production. You can install it in production, but they're available kind of like NPM. I like the analogy you drew there. That's a good one.
Well, and what occurred to me is because you've got a blog post on this and the package you created was on your promises work with Apex, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the end of that blog post, you're just like, and if you want to install this, it's just like SFDX package number and away you go. And it's just seemed really, really elegant a way to get code like that up and running and, something that somebody can play around with.
Yeah, it's a really nice way. I mean, it seems redundant to say, but it's a really nice way to package things up. It puts a nice bow on it.
Right. Okay. And then you also had the famous Salesforce wizard, Mr. Brian Kwong, who I am also still trying to get onto this podcast, by the way, about moving an app to Visualforce from Visualforce to LWC, which is something we've written about a lot. We have a video series on this. So this is kind of a big topic amongst developers, but like kind of take me through the journey that you went through with that and like, tell me, like, what was the pain points of moving something from Visualforce into LWC?
Yeah, so let me back up here. When LWC was first launched, mm-hmm. I was out on maternity leave.
Oh, that's right.
And so, I was hanging out with my kid, doing that sort of stuff. And then when I came back to it, we started doing these code lives. And I was like, I want to do something with LWC. And so I was talking with Brian, and we came up with this idea of doing this Visualforce to LWC CodeLive episode. And it was one of those things where we're both kind of the net new to this, and we both wanted to we'd both done the Trailhead modules and quick starts to get all the tooling set up and all that sort of jazz. But we were both very new to the entire process. And so what were the pain points? Lack of experience and knowledge, right?
Right.
But we had a lot of fun working through those. I think the biggest pain point that we had, that was a conceptual one, because how you communicate between components is way different than Aura. And, we had these preconceived notions about how it should work, how we thought it would work, because we had experience in Aura. And it turns out those are wrong universally.
Right. And I thought there was a good moment there where it was like, I feel like you and Brian both had this aha moment of like, why should I componentize this? Like, it's almost weird to think back to the Visualforce days where it was actually kind of convenient for your code to basically be constrained to a single page. And it's like, you need to change something, you could just go to that page and that's where that field is. But making things into discrete components, I think the way you described it is that it's simply more agile and flexible. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I think when I'm trying to teach something, when I'm trying to convey a concept, I always try and look for what is a convenient, understandable metaphor. And sort of the obvious one, right down to the imagery we use for Lightning Web Components, is this sort of like building block setup. And it's almost a perfect metaphor. It's just that the thing that you don't realize if you've got that as your metaphor is that you've got this magic box over on the side, and every time you hit a button, you can get another block out of it. Right? You don't have a finite number of blocks.
Right.
And so if you create your own blocks, which is another function of our magic box, then you can use those wherever you see fit. And it makes sense to be able to have like a very tightly focused, does one thing well block that plays nicely with others.
I like that analogy in part because everybody who's ever played with Legos has gotten to that point where it's just like, you don't have that one block that's either the right size or shape or color.
Exactly.
and this is not a problem anymore because you can just pull it out of the magic box.
Exactly.
And I want to put a cap on that one with also that I think that's about the fifth time that I've heard Brian state that he's not a developer, and I strongly disagree with that opinion.
Brian says a lot about not being a developer, and I've seen some of the flows he's worked on, and they give me a headache just looking at them, let alone trying to understand them. So in my book, Brian's a developer. He just doesn't know it yet.
I think that's a great way to put it. Okay, so I want to move on to one of your other projects, but first, and I'll kind of give you free reign with this because I know it's a difficult question, and I'm dreading the day that somebody asks about some of my own content. But do you have other episodes that are like kind of the favorite amongst your children that you really want to highlight?
Yeah, I have two that I think are like just really good content. They may not be the best recording, but we've got really good content. We did a CodeLive live at Forcelandia a year ago.
Nice.
And I had Simon Goodyear with me, and we built a trigger framework that was cross-package compatible and was based on metadata.
Cool.
So you could package up your metadata for triggers, etc., that you wanted to be run. And the one trigger handler was good for all objects. And as soon as that fired off, it would go grab the metadata and run those classes. It's very elegant. I was pretty proud of the design. So that one's a good one. Now, because it was live, there's some audio quality issues there.
Sure.
The other one that I really like is I did one on, I got to the point where I just had an itch I wanted to scratch, development-wise. And I created and this sounds oxymoronic, I created a Apex class that gives you a generic type-safe collection utility.
Nice.
Yeah. And that's playing on the very edges of what Apex is capable of doing, just messing with the type system and getting it to work in such a way that you can pass in any kind of strongly typed collection and get a map back out of it that is equally strongly typed, but is still generic enough to use with whatever you pass in.
Nice. Okay, well, I think that segues to my next question because I think that's actually part of this project, you also just recently released Apex Recipes as a GitHub repo. What is the mission statement for Apex Recipes?
To be bite-sized chunks of code that demonstrate a plausible use case and the proper way, the best practice way, to use a buzzword, of making that happen.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I think in programmer terms, you are being slightly opinionated about how the code should actually look and behave.
I think if I'm honest, I'm being very opinionated, but yes.
Okay. Yes. Nice. And how do you see people using this repo?
A couple of different ways. One, if you just want to start reading code, one of the things that I've learned over my career as a software developer is I learn other patterns and techniques by reading other people's code. Mm-hmm. So come read this code, basically.
Gotcha.
And the other part of it is, if you've got a very tactical question, how do I write a queuable class? Mm-hmm. We have a recipe for that. Mm-hmm. Go see, okay, this is what it looks like to write a queuable class. Oh, and then this is how I test that queuable class.
Yeah. Nice. I think there's also a nice layer of discoverability to it because, especially with Apex kind of being its own special snowflake, sometimes you don't know, like, for instance, the existence of a queuable class,
right,
may actually be, interesting information to somebody who's trying to do something in an asynchronous world these days, especially if they have, code that predates some of the newer stuff that's out there.
It's very true. And one of the things that we did to try and make it as accessible as possible is we've got it set up so that when you install the package or you install the code into a Scratch org, there's actually an in-org UI that you can go and navigate, and you can see not only the code and the documentation, but also related code, like tests, or, if something depends on something else, you can see that related code there too.
Got it. So basically, by installing it into a Scratch org or a sandbox, I can browse the code, I can browse the documentation, copy and paste to my leisure. Yeah,
yeah, and it's all like probably overly commented.
I think that was a design goal, if I recall correctly. Yeah. So it just came out a couple of weeks ago, but it's an ongoing project. So what kind of updates are you looking at for it?
Oh, we have a whole roadmap of things that are coming. Everything from approval processes, how to deal with those, to everyone's favorite, the Chatter API.
Oh,
yeah,
brave.
And we've got, as new features roll out, we are incorporating those as well. So one of the ones we as an example of this, we did a few weeks back was we did one on transaction finalizers. And transaction finalizers are a great Apex feature. They're not in GA yet, but they are coming to open beta.
Gotcha.
And so as that, comes into open beta, we'll drop that branch we did on CodeLive into Apex Recipes. And now you have an example of how to do finalizers.
Nice. Yeah, it feels like with the 3 release cycle that you're going to have your work carved out for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it feels like every day I go to Chris and I'm like, hey, I've got an idea.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Maybe he'll bring us the Null Coalescence operator.
Nice. And kind of on that note, this is an open source project. It's all up on GitHub, and I assume you're taking pull requests.
We are taking pull requests, and we've actually received quite a few. Some as things like somebody gave me a pull request to help speed up the org setup for Apex Recipes on Windows.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
And then other ones are like, you've got this sort of naming convention here, but it would make more sense if it was this way. And, it turns out they were right. So we changed the names of some of the methods, and pull requests are very gladly accepted.
Awesome. And to kind of wrap all of that up, I think it's safe to say that you are at least somewhat opinionated on Apex. If there was one thing you wish people did or didn't do with Apex, what would it be?
One thing I wish people did or didn't do with Apex. Wow. Did not see that question coming. As I think about it, I think I would like to... I've seen a lot of... How do I put this? I've seen a lot of things that I can't unsee in Apex. I've seen code where every string was a constant defined at the top of the file.
Oh, no.
I've seen triggers that were 2,000 lines long. And I think I would just like to see more Apex code that was not built to patterns, but built holistically with an idea of maintainability.
And that's our show. Now, before we go, I did ask after Kevin's favorite non-technical hobby, and it turns out he's got 2 of them.
I have 2.
Okay.
I'm a music person, so I play many instruments. Yeah, if you ever see me on CodeLive, you'll see there are guitars and mandolins hanging in the background.
Gotcha.
And then photography.
I want to thank Kevin for the great conversation and information, all the great content he is putting together to help level up our community. I want to thank you for listening. And if you want to learn more about this podcast, head on over to developer.salesforce.com/podcast, where you can hear old episodes, see the show notes, and have links to your favorite podcast service. I'll talk to you next week.